Well, hello again, everybody. Welcome to your next project. Now, this project is about spatial dominance, and you can see from the notes we talked about landscapes and breaking them down into 3 sections. So 3 sections can be foreground, middle ground, and background. And what we're going to play around with is 3 different sizes of spaces. So a large size, a middle size, and a small size. Now, when we talk about spatial dominance, within a painting, usually the spatial dominance or the dominant space would be the largest space. Sometimes that can also be called your motivation. So the largest space would be the artistic motive for doing the piece. Sometimes I find the word motivation gets a little confusing, so we're going to say just spatial dominance. Now, looking at this one picture that we have, these are my own photos that we're going to go through, and I have to admit, I forget what mountain this is. But if we look at this, the foreground would be the water, the middle ground would be the tree line, and the background would be the mountain and the sky space. So this picture right here is cropped already so that the background is the dominant space, or we could say it's a background motivated painting or photo, soon to be painting. Now, the mid-ground is the smallest space, and then the foreground would be the medium space. Now I'm going to flip through here. Now here's another photo. Once again, I have no recollection of where I took this photo, but it looks like a lovely place to visit. I was probably on vacation, and I'd say somewhere in the mountains. Now, if I look at this, I would say at the moment that this is kind of a foreground dominant piece because the water line is significantly bigger, or it's the largest space. Now it's a little bit confusing when I look at the rest of it because it's like I can't really clearly see what would be a middle or a small space. So this is where we can start to manipulate things. So I'm going to hit the edit button. I'm back on my iPhone. I'm holding it sideways today so that the orientation is a little bigger for you guys to see. Now, once I hit the edit button, some of these icons I hope are starting to become a little bit more familiar. The very bottom one that looks like the little box is our cropping tool. So I'm going to touch that for a moment, and I'm going to come in through here, and I think I'm just going to maybe crop off that side of the painting. So here I can see that the foreground is still the largest space. The middle ground could be like the mountains as well as the treed area. The middle ground is kind of a medium space, but the sky, the middle ground and the sky are somewhat similar. So I can come in through here and maybe even crop that in a little bit more and say that the sky is now the smallest space. Or just for fun, maybe I'll take some of the mountains right out of it and maybe even, come here, little corner, play around with something like this. And now that's a little bit more clear as far as large space, medium space, and small space, because that little sky at the very, very top is a very small space. And do you see how now this photo all of a sudden becomes just that little bit more interesting because we have an asymmetrical balance? I'm gonna hit cancel here just so it goes back to the regular photo. Discard changes, and let's look at some more photos here. Okay, so here's another photo shoot that I did up in and around, I'm pretty sure this was Lake Louise. Oh yeah, totally Lake Louise. So this is that path that goes along Lake Louise. At the moment, the photo itself is not terribly clear whether it is a foreground, middle ground, or background dominant piece. So what I'm going to do is come in here and manipulate this. So same dealio, I'm going to hit the edit button and go to the cropping tool. And the first thing that I'm going to do is say, okay, well, let's see what a foreground motivated piece would be. So I'm going to go ahead and chop that. Now that tree on the left is kind of dorky now, so I think I'm going to chop that right out too. And let's focus on the path here. Now that path is really interesting. I think that the path and the water are the foreground, so that's definitely the biggest space. The mid-ground, which is the darker mountain on the right and the other mountain on the left, is the medium space. And let's do it a little bit more dramatic. And if I crop that down a little farther, that one little peekaboo of the background mountain is now really truly the smallest space. So that's kind of, I actually really like that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to screenshot. Now everybody's phone is a little bit different for screenshots. Having an iPhone, and I've got the iPhone 13, so I'm just going to squeeze either side, and that's going to take a screenshot, which will then save to my camera roll. I always like to chop off the excess when I do screenshots. Here we go. Save to photos. Now, let's say I would like to use the same photo and I would like to change the orientation now so that it is, well, look, look at that. I just moved that around and it kind of came in here perfectly. This would be now more of a background motivated piece, because the background in this case is definitely the sky, and that back mountain, the farthest away two mountains, I guess, do somewhat merge into the sky. So I'm going to include that as a whole area. Now, the water in through here is, and the little pathway to the right is definitely the smaller space. And the mountains that are on the left as well as on the right are the medium space. Now, I'm going to crop out that one tree on the left because it's a bit awkward. And you know what? The one tree that's sticking up, oops, by left I meant right. The one tree that's sticking up on the left is a little awkward though, because it kind of is just on its own. So meaning like it doesn't have a bottom to it. So I'm going to slide this up, and that's still quite interesting. I can still see large, medium, and small. Sky and mountains in the background still being the large. The medium space still being the mountains, the small space in the foreground still kind of working. Yeah, actually, you know what? It is more dramatic this way though. That's kind of fun. So here was one photo that I could have more than one different dominance, and it really just changes the whole vibe of the piece. I'm going to hit cancel here and discard changes, and let's see about doing this. There's that guy. Ooh, that's kind of pretty. Let's work with this one. This is kind of a boring photo, and it's because, you know, where the water line is, it's sort of split in the middle, and those trees on that little island is also kind of split in the middle, so it's not terribly interesting. So let's see what we can do with playing around with just spatial dominance. Coming back in through here, I'm going to hit the edit tool. And let's start off for fun. I think this one's kind of easy. I could say that, let's make that a foreground dominant piece now. I really like that the little island is sort of off on the left, and it's counterbalanced by the whole grassy area in the foreground coming forward, being a bit of a diagonal here. I think that looks really good. Now let's say if I wanted to use the same painting and come up with a, let's say a sky motivated piece. I could do something like that. I could also do something like that. This is kind of interesting. I actually don't mind that at all. Little islands in the back. I think that could make a very nice calm painting. Now let's see what happens if we work with, trying to zoom in a tiny bit here. That's also very interesting. I think that could also be a painting. I think that could also be a painting. Different motivations of foreground, middle ground, background, large, medium, and small. And once again, motivation would also mean dominance. Yeah, So that was kind of interesting, of taking a rather boring photo and switching it into something else. So your job is to work with some photos that I give you of landscapes and play around with how you can crop the photo to come up with different ideas of dominance of space. So either foreground, middle ground, dominant, or background, dominance. And let's see what you guys can come up with for making some original pieces of art. The materials to use for this project is a little bit of a choose your own adventure. If you don't have very much time during the week, you can work on just doing a drawing or a sketch. If you feel like cracking open your paints and playing around with watercolor, acrylic, or oil, please do so. If you feel like even doing collage or anything else like that, choose your own adventure on whatever kind of makes you happy and brings you joy for the moment. I can't wait to see what you guys do. So looking forward to our critique. Bye for now. Well, hello again, you guys. I'm going to give you another tutorial on how to go through this spatial dominance thing with using a physical photo instead of on your iPad or on your iPhone or your device. Because sometimes, you know, you've got a photo kicking around and it's just a real quick, simple way of doing this. This is how I used to do this before there was such things as big smartphones and fancy devices. And so what I have here is I've printed this photo, and I've printed it much larger, well, on 8.5 by 11, so it's a very large piece, just so you guys can physically see it. Now what I did there is I've got 2 sheets of computer paper that I literally folded and just ripped in half, so I have 4 sheets of smaller pieces of paper. I'm going to turn it in so that the ripped half is on the outside and the straight edge is on the inside. And then what I can do is start to play around with this a little bit. So right now, this photo, I took this photo with actually trying to have a foreground dominant piece in through here. So here's our foreground, here's our middle ground, and here's our background. So you can see from this initial cropping, foreground is the large space, middle ground here is sort of the medium space, and then the sky in through here is the smaller space comparatively. So let's see what we can do if we can switch it. So I'm just going to slide a piece of paper up and decide where I want to put it. I'm just going to go here for a moment. So that already is giving me a smaller space in the foreground. Now, as soon as I've done that, I'm starting to notice in through here, like there's a funny tree here, and there's a whole bunch of space on this side that I'm just going to experiment what happens if I cropped it out. So I'm going to crop out that one tree on the side. I don't mind there being a bit of a gap and then a tall tree just for fun. And I think this is not as interesting on this area, so I'm just going to go ahead and put a piece of paper on top. Oh, and I actually totally like that. I think that's kind of cool. So in this case, we've flipped it now so that the sky is the large space. The middle ground here is still kind of the medium, and the foreground here is sort of the smaller piece. Now, the best advice I can give you when you're playing around with this, especially when you're first learning this, is just push your extremes. So I'm going to slide this piece of paper up to push this extreme, meaning that this foreground area, I'm going to make super duper small. Now, as soon as I've done that, now this is very much where your intuition just starts to kick in. So when I've come up a little higher here, right away, I kind of felt like I wanted to come in a little bit closer. Oh, I actually really like that. Now, I do like the idea of having, as far as thinking about the middle ground and through here with the treed area, I like them to be a little bit more imbalanced. The sun here is kind of one of the biggest focal points. So sometimes having some elements or some shapes that are next to that, you can push your extremes once again and make this a smaller space and make that a larger space, and it's just really interesting. Once again, I do like that it kind of dips down from the tree line through here and then leads you in towards the sun. I think that's kind of cool. And I haven't done anything to the top, so just for fun. Yeah, I think I could do something like that. I think that could be really interesting, and I actually really do love the way that there's more light. I think from a painting point of view, that's going to be really fun to paint, whereas from a painting point of view, that's going to be sort of dotty and blobby and messy. So anytime that you have stronger lights and shadows within a photo reference, you want to kind of crop in around those lights and shadows, because it's going to be easier to paint and it's going to look better. I really like that, but once again, let's just see about pushing the extreme. So what if I kind of kept this close cropped in? I actually don't mind that, but I have to say that it's getting a little, this space is getting a little too close to that space as far as size-wise. Funny enough, that doesn't really do it for me. I really like the way that this leads in, but I think when we start to lose the treetops and when the sunspot gets too close to the edge, I feel like that's just kind of uncomfortable. I don't think I like it. So I'm gonna move that back up. And maybe, what if we did, I'm gonna move that up even more. And you can see, like, I'm literally just playing. I'm just moving pieces of paper around until I find something that I think is kind of cool. I love these lead-in lines. I think that's very cool. So maybe what I'll do is I'll give a little bit more space, just so I can have a little bit more space and it doesn't feel like this edge is getting so close cropped into here. So I do think that if I change this into a foreground motivated painting or a foreground dominant painting, I can have a lot more fun painting gobs of snow and getting chunky monkey in through here. And then the problem with this area of this bank of rock land thing, not having very much light on it, I think that's okay, because I can sort of blur that and I wouldn't put a lot of emphasis on that, and I would really develop the emphasis here. And you can see that this shape is also a completely different shape than the original photo that I had that was more of a landscape orientation, like this. So it was wider than it was tall. A moment ago I had it so it was taller than it was wide. So here you go. You don't have to use a device to do this. You can use any printed photos that you have with just cut out pieces of paper and literally just sliding them along until you find something that you think is kind of cool. So I look forward to seeing your spatial dominance photos, and most importantly, spatial dominance photos, as well as the art that you make from it. This is something completely for fun. So this is more so for you to explore with your mind, to think about not having to paint the photo exactly. And this is the biggest point I want to hit home. So as artists, we rarely paint the whole photo. It's your job to kind of come in and decide what are some interesting aspects that you can sort of hone in on, what are some uninteresting aspects that you can kind of get rid on, and then where are you going to decide to put the most amount of interest in this from this photo inspiration. One of my mantras that will come up a little bit more during this course is select, reject, and arrange. So select the things you want, reject the things that you don't want, and then arrange them around a little tiny bit, which we'll learn later on, to make it look good. Okie dokie, you guys, have fun with this, and I will see you soon.